Alright, so I need to talk about the Las Vegas Raiders right now, because there are a few things floating around this team that I think are being seriously misread, and one of them in particular has the kind of long-term implications that people are going to be talking about for the next 10 years. Not exaggerating. This draft situation with one specific player could end up being one of the most referenced front office decisions of this entire cycle, and right now, it's barely getting the attention it deserves. So let me walk through what I actually think is going on in Las Vegas, what's being gotten right, what's being gotten wrong, and what the next few months are genuinely going to reveal about this organization. The Raiders are on the field right now. Pads on, real plays. Real competition for real jobs. Everything that gets argued about in podcasts and comment sections for months, all of that opinion is starting to collide with actual football, and that collision began on May 18th. Full media access doesn't arrive until Wednesday, but enough is already circulating around this building to have a substantive conversation. And I want to have that conversation now, while the offseason noise is still fresh enough to compare against what's actually starting to take shape in practice. Let me start with something that might sound like a footnote, but is actually, in my view, one of the sharpest strategic decisions this coaching staff has made heading into the summer. The Raiders have joint practices scheduled with the Houston Texans ahead of their August 20th preseason matchup. I already know your instinct is to mentally file that under preseason logistics and keep scrolling. I'm asking you not to do that because I think it matters more than almost anything else this franchise has arranged this offseason, and I want to be specific about why. Here's what happens inside every NFL training camp that coaches know and almost nobody outside the building discusses honestly. After 3 or 4 consecutive weeks of working against the same teammates, something quietly dies in the competitive quality of your sessions. The offensive linemen have absorbed every tendency of every pass rusher across from them. The quarterbacks have seen every coverage rotation the secondary runs until those rotations feel less like a puzzle and more like a script they've already memorized. The cornerbacks know exactly which releases each receiver prefers out of which formations. None of that makes the players worse, but it makes the practice environment fundamentally dishonest because the uncertainty that forces genuine problem-solving under pressure has been replaced by pattern recognition and familiarity. You can still accomplish installation goals. You can run situational packages and refine technique. But you cannot manufacture the competitive stress that forces a player to reveal what he actually is when the game gets hard and the answers aren't already written on the wall in front of him. Now put the Houston Texans into that picture. Suddenly, Colton Miller is lined up against Will Anderson Jr., a player who has spent 0 time studying his tendencies, who has no film on his sets, who is arriving completely fresh and hitting him from angles that no Raiders teammate has tried all summer. The quarterbacks, whether it's Kirk Cousins or Mendoza working through competitive reps, are dropping back behind center against a secondary that spent its entire training camp preparing for someone completely different. The confusion generated in those situations is authentic. The physical demand is real, and the Texans are not a gentle test. Their defense is one of the genuinely stronger units in the AFC right now. Running your offense into that wall for multiple days in August is going to surface information about this roster's actual readiness that months of internal work simply cannot produce. That's not a minor preseason scheduling note. That's an intelligent, deliberate decision by a coaching staff that understands what environments you need to build in order to actually learn something true about the players you have. Now let me get into the story I've been sitting with most carefully over the past week, because I think this is where the real stakes of what the Raiders did this draft are hiding, and I don't think enough people have fully processed it. I'm talking about Germaine McCoy. And I want to take my time here rather than skimming over the medical picture, because the details are not just relevant background, they are the entire argument. Before the draft, McCoy was being placed on boards as a legitimate first-round cornerback by multiple reputable evaluators, not barely first round. Not a player who slides in if the value is right. A genuine top 15 to top 20 selection, the kind of prospect that several franchises were circling with serious conviction and real intent. Then the medical flags came out, a knee injury, a bone plug. And what followed, this cascading rapid evacuation of draft boards across the league, looked from the outside like 32 informed medical departments all arriving independently at the same alarming conclusion. That inference is rational. If that many organizations are pulling a player off their board simultaneously, the injury must warrant it. That's not a coincidence. That's collective professional judgment. I made that inference myself, and I said so at the time. The problem is that it was built on incomplete information, and the complete information tells a dramatically different story. Dr. Laney Johnson, a genuinely credible orthopedic surgeon with real expertise in this type of injury, addressed McCoy's situation specifically on a Raiders podcast. What he said doesn't just complicate the narrative, it fundamentally dismantles the panic that drove McCoy down 100 picks. Bone plug injuries are not a uniform diagnosis with a predictable outcome. The long-term prognosis varies considerably based on one central variable, the physical size of the plug. For plugs measuring at or below approximately 1 centimeter, roughly half an inch, the medical evidence shows excellent long-term function. More than a decade of normal high-level athletic performance, assuming the ACL holds structurally and arthritis doesn't become a factor. That's the favorable end of this spectrum, and it's a genuinely favorable outcome. Now here's the part that changed my entire read on this situation. The medical disclosure shared with all 32 franchises ahead of draft weekend indicated that McCoy's plug is believed to fall below that threshold, under the half-inch mark. If that information is accurate, and the people who have been inside this situation believe it is, then we may be looking at a player who requires no surgical intervention for the entirety of his athletic prime. The injury that sent him past 100 picks on draft night might be, in practical terms, close to a non-issue for the foreseeable future of his career. There's a second procedure that could theoretically be performed to improve long-term joint health, but it carries genuine surgical risk. A procedure designed to make something better could, if healing doesn't proceed as expected, leave things in a worse position than where they started. The Raiders are not pursuing that aggressively right now, and I think that reflects sensible judgment rather than carelessness. The current plan is straightforward. Let McCoy play his rookie season, monitor the knee responsibly, and avoid unnecessary intervention when current indicators suggest his function is normal without it. Jon Spytek did the actual work here. He went into the medical file and evaluated the specific details instead of reacting to the language around the injury or the behavior of other organizations who were either moving too fast or didn't trust what their own evaluation turned up. And because he did that work, Las Vegas walked out of this draft with a player who was credibly projected in the top 10 and got him at pick 101. 101. If McCoy's knee holds, and right now, the real medical picture says it should, this becomes one of the clearest examples in recent draft history of a front office correctly identifying a market inefficiency, maintaining the conviction to act on it when the entire rest of the league was going the other direction, and coming away with extraordinary value because of it. The historical comparison class for that kind of draft capital displacement on that kind of prospect is short, and the names in it are significant. Now I want to move into territory that's a little less comfortable for me to discuss, because the honest version of this defensive line conversation is more valuable than the optimistic one, and I have real concerns I don't want to soften past the point where they stop being useful. Adam Butler has been appearing in off-season winner write-ups this week, and I want to engage with that carefully because part of that recognition is genuinely earned, and part of it rests on a fundamental mislabeling that obscures something important about this roster's actual construction. Butler is a legitimate NFL player. In specific situations, pass-down packages, one-on-one matchups against interior guards, third and long environments where everyone on the field knows the ball is going in the air, he generates real, consistent disruption. That contribution is valuable, and it's real, and I don't want to minimize it. What I can't get past is seeing him described as this team's nose tackle because that label is factually inaccurate, and the inaccuracy has consequences. A nose tackle is not just a large body aligned in the interior of a defensive line. A nose tackle is a very specific player with very specific requirements: elite lower body anchor, the ability to absorb double-team blocking without surrendering ground, and the capacity to two-gap on rundowns, occupying blockers long enough to let the linebackers behind him find and attack the football carrier. Butler gets displaced by combination blocks. That's not a moral failing. Most defensive tackles in the league do. But it's a disqualifying trait when the specific question being asked is whether he can anchor a run defense as the primary interior presence. He cannot do that job reliably. It's not his game. What does become genuinely interesting is the Rob Leonard factor. Leonard's promotion to defensive coordinator matters specifically for a player like Butler because Leonard's professional identity is built around defensive line development and schematic design that creates favorable individual matchups through alignment games and interior stunts. Patrick Graham and Pete Carroll were not defensive line coaches. Their expertise didn't live in the granularity required to consistently manufacture the specific situations where Butler's tools operate at their ceiling. Leonard knows how to build those situations in his sleep. Butler is going to see better deployment under this coordinator than he has seen at any prior point in his time in Las Vegas. That upgrade is real, even though the roster didn't change around him. But here's the limitation I keep returning to, and I think it's important to say it plainly. Improving Butler's scheme environment does not solve the structural problem sitting at the center of this defensive line. The Raiders don't currently have a player who handles rundowns convincingly and brings legitimate pass rush capacity on third down within the same individual. That combination, two-way interior presence, someone who can hold up physically against ground-heavy offenses and still be a real threat when the pocket needs to collapse, is rare and expensive across this entire league, which is precisely why franchises spend enormous capital to acquire it. What Las Vegas currently has is specialists who get attacked when teams commit to running the ball and run defenders without the athletic ceiling to stay on the field in clear passing situations. Any good offensive line in this schedule is going to locate that gap within the first series of a game and spend the next 3 hours putting the ball directly into it. Thomas Booker is the developmental name I'm watching with the most genuine interest, and I want to be clear about why, because the reasons that actually matter here are specific. His first step quickness at the snap is legitimately impressive. The burst and timing he generates off the ball represents the kind of athletic foundation that, when the technique is refined and the schematic context is built correctly around it, translates into real interior pressure at the professional level. The inconsistency is obvious and it's real. The pass rush plan needs structural development that hasn't fully happened yet. But Booker's physical tools are the kind that sharpen with coaching rather than eroding under the demands of a professional environment. Whether Leonard can develop him the way he's developed young defensive linemen throughout his coaching career is one of the more important questions these OTAs and the training camp that follows are going to begin answering. I'm watching that development closely because the upside attached to those tools is real, even if the proof isn't on the table yet. I do need to address Jonah Laulu directly because some of the coverage circulating this week has applied language to him. Hidden gem, secret weapon, a player quietly undervalued on this roster that I think deserves more scrutiny than it's been receiving. The sack numbers that get cited are the foundation of that framing, and I want to push back on using sack totals as the primary lens for evaluating interior defensive linemen because sacks reflect opportunity and situational circumstance almost as much as they reflect individual capability. The numbers I want to examine before I'm ready to apply that kind of language to a player are pressure rate, quarterback hit percentage, and performance against run-heavy teams on early downs when the game plan isn't built around passing situations. Consistent sack numbers with inconsistent pressure generation, and run defense that struggles when opposing offenses decide to be physical. That profile is a situational contributor. A useful piece in specific contexts. That is not what hidden gem means, and I think the language is getting ahead of the evidence. The player this defense most needs, the piece that would genuinely transform what this unit is capable of becoming, is someone who can dominate rundowns and still be a credible threat when the ball needs to go in the air on 3rd and long. No amount of schematic creativity from Leonard fully compensates for the absence of that player. The Raiders have useful pieces. They have developmental cases with real physical ceilings. What they don't yet have is that complete interior presence in the middle, and that gap is going to be visible across a 17-game schedule against good offensive lines that do their homework. So here's where my thinking actually lands as I wait for Wednesday to arrive and real information to start flowing. The questions that the next several weeks will begin answering are substantive ones. Who is taking first-team quarterback reps, and what does that competition look like when it's playing out in real time against real professional defenders? How does Mendoza handle organized team activities against players whose entire job is to make him look like he doesn't belong? What does Leonard's defensive line rotation actually look like when he's building it with full installation time and a complete roster? And most importantly, how does McCoy move? What does that knee look like under the genuine physical demands of professional practice sessions where nobody is taking it easy because of an injury history? That last question is the quietest and most consequential thing coming out of these early workouts. If McCoy moves freely, if the knee responds the way the medical picture suggests it should, then what Spytek pulled off in this draft is going to look better every week from now until the season ends. The medical diligence was real. The roster construction logic has an internal coherence to it. The coordinator hire is pointed directly at the development problems this building has needed to solve for years. The foundation is there. But football has a permanent habit of humbling the preparation that looks sound on paper. What's happening in that facility right now, in the position meetings and the individual one-on-one battles and the early installation work that no camera is capturing yet, is compounding into something that will either validate the offseason choices or begin exposing the gaps that optimistic coverage has been quietly covering over. 3 months from now, the games settle everything. Right now, what we're watching, or waiting to watch, is the version of this team they're genuinely trying to build. Wednesday cannot get here fast enough.